There's a moment, right after someone disrespects you, when everything inside you tightens, your jaw, your chest, your pride. And in that moment, you're standing at a crossroads. One road leads to instant reaction, rage, sarcasm, silence that screams. The other, it leads to restraint, clarity, and self-respect. See, there's a difference between being patient and betraying yourself, between keeping the peace and abandoning your own. Stoicism doesn't teach you to be passive. It teaches you to be powerful without losing control. And if you're not careful, you'll hand your power over to someone who never deserved it. In today's video, we're unpacking the 5 things you should never do when someone disrespects you, because the way you respond tells the world what you believe you're worth. And your worth is not negotiable. So if you've ever walked away from a situation thinking, I should have handled that differently, this is for you. Hit that subscribe button, like the video if you're ready to reclaim your power, and share this with someone who's done playing small. Drop a comment below, my energy is not for sale. Let's talk boundaries, self-control, and the kind of strength that doesn't raise its voice. Let's begin. 1. Don't react emotionally or impulsively. When someone disrespects you, the sting is immediate. The body tightens, the heart races, and a familiar heat begins to rise. In that moment, your first instinct may be to react, to say something sharp, maybe even cruel, something that will remind them you're not to be messed with. It feels justified, even righteous, like you're reclaiming your dignity in real time. But what most people don't realize is that the second you react purely from emotion, you give that person exactly what they wanted: your control, your peace, your power. And once it's gone, you can't get it back without cost. You've just told them, in subtle but undeniable ways, that they own a part of you, that their behavior gets to decide the tone of your day. Stoicism draws a hard line here. It doesn't ask you to suppress your emotions or deny your humanity. It asks you to master yourself, to train your mind to pause when it most wants to lash out. Because when you return fire, you're not just stepping into their world, you're lowering yourself into their emotional mud. And no matter how clever your comeback is, it never cleans you off. The short-lived satisfaction of getting even fades fast. What lingers is the embarrassment, the regret, the realization that you let someone else's lack of character pull you out of yours. The Stoics teach that power is not shown in how loud you can shout, but in how still you can stay when the world tries to shake you. It's not passivity, it's precision. You're not ignoring the disrespect. You're choosing the battlefield, the timing, the terms, if the battle is even worth your energy at all. That is the Stoic edge, knowing when to speak and when to walk away. Not out of fear, but out of power. Because your peace is not up for auction every time someone forgets your worth. Think about it. The people who stay calm in chaos, the ones who don't flinch when insulted or provoked, those are the people others respect, even fear a little. Not because they're aggressive, but because they're untouchable. Their silence doesn't signal weakness, it signals composure. Their restraint doesn't mean they didn't feel the sting, it means they refused to give it authority. That kind of control, emotional discipline, is one of the rarest and most respected strengths in the modern world. Letting someone pull you into a petty argument may win you the last word, but it loses you something bigger, the higher ground. You're now co-authoring their drama, and the more you participate, the more they feed off your energy, your time, your presence. People who thrive on conflict crave your reaction. It's how they measure their impact. But when you stay calm, when you respond deliberately, or not at all, you're showing them they have no influence over your inner state. You're telling them with your stillness, I am not your puppet. And this is the core of Stoicism. It's the refusal to be emotionally hijacked. You don't hand over the remote to your mood just because someone pressed a button. You decide what you'll feel, how long you'll feel it, and whether they even deserve a reaction. It's not about bottling things up. It's about being strategic with your energy. It's about choosing clarity over chaos, self-respect over ego, peace over pride. You can still set a boundary, you can still assert yourself, but do it from a place of control, not combustion. The goal isn't to humiliate them. The goal is to stay anchored in who you are, regardless of who they are. That's what true power looks like, because not every insult deserves a response. Not every provocation deserves your presence. And not every battle deserves to be fought just because it was offered. The more you practice this, the more automatic it becomes, and in time your calm becomes louder than their insult, your detachment becomes your protection, your silence becomes your strongest defense, because the goal isn't to win the moment, the goal is to win your peace. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. But of course that's just the first trap. Because once you've held your silence and walked away, there's still another danger waiting, the temptation to let disrespect slide in silence and pretend it didn't happen. And that's where we're headed next. Let's talk about why staying silent at the wrong time can cost you even more. 2. Don't ignore disrespect or let it slide. Disrespect doesn't always enter loudly. Sometimes it slips in quietly, through a sarcastic comment disguised as humor, a delayed response meant to signal disregard, or a subtle shift in tone that carries more weight than words. And when that happens, the real question isn't what they did. It's what you're going to do about it. Because every moment of disrespect is more than a passing event. It's a test. A test of your boundaries, your standards, and most importantly, your self-respect. The biggest mistake people make isn't being disrespected. It's letting it slide in the name of keeping the peace. But peace that comes at the cost of your dignity is not peace. It's quiet self-erasure. The Stoics were clear about this. You cannot control the actions of others, but you are fully responsible for what you permit. When you pretend something didn't bother you, not because you've truly processed it, but because you're afraid of being perceived as too sensitive or too much, you slowly shrink into someone you don't recognize. You bend to avoid conflict, not realizing that the very act of bending teaches others exactly how to treat you. And the more you let go unchecked, the more they push. Because people rarely cross boundaries by accident. They test waters first, lightly, subtly, just to see if you flinch. And if you don't, they move closer to the line, then past it, until you look around and realize there are no lines left at all. This erosion doesn't happen overnight. It's death by 1,000 small concessions. You tell yourself it's not worth the drama, not worth losing the relationship, not worth being misunderstood. So you let one comment slide, then another. You accept the cancelled plans, the dismissive attitude, the tone that implies you don't matter as much, and slowly your silence becomes a permission slip for their behavior. That's not strength. That's self-abandonment dressed up as diplomacy. What Stoicism teaches is this. Setting boundaries isn't about being combative. It's about being anchored. It's about knowing where you end and where someone else's behavior becomes unacceptable. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need a dramatic exit to prove a point. A quiet no, a decisive walk away, or even a simple refusal to engage again. That's enough. That's the Stoic response. You don't fight for validation. You move in a way that validates yourself. And when you do that consistently, people start to understand that your time, your energy, and your presence are not freely given. They are earned. This mindset flips everything. You stop measuring your strength by how much you can tolerate and start measuring it by how clearly you can draw the line. That clarity is uncomfortable at first, especially if you're used to putting others before yourself. But clarity is kindness to yourself and, ironically, to them, because people will only treat you as well as you require them to. And if you don't require much, don't be surprised when they offer even less. So the next time someone crosses the line, don't wait until it becomes a pattern. Don't tell yourself it's easier to stay quiet. because the longer you stay quiet, the louder the disrespect becomes. Speak with calm conviction. Remove yourself if needed. Let your actions communicate your standards without having to justify them. You don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing to honor yourself. You owe it to yourself to stop tolerating anything that chips away at your spirit. And when you do that, when you refuse to abandon yourself for the comfort of others, something powerful happens. The people who never respected you fall away. Not because you pushed them out, but because they can no longer thrive in a space where self-respect is non-negotiable. And the people who belong in your life, they rise, they recognize your clarity, they meet your energy, because respect, real respect, begins with the one you give yourself. But even when you've drawn the line, and even when you've walked away, there's still one more trap waiting. The temptation to seek closure or recognition from the very people who wounded you. And that pursuit, chasing validation from those who disrespected you, is the next silent mistake that keeps you stuck. Let's get into it. 3. Don't seek validation or closure from them. There's a hidden trap that most people walk into after being disrespected, and it's not the urge to retaliate or even the need to explain themselves. It's the quiet desperation to be seen, to be understood, to be validated by the very person who just devalued them. And it's a trap because it feels like healing, but it's really another form of self-abandonment. When someone crosses a line with you, whether they ignore your boundaries, humiliate you in front of others, or minimize your feelings, there's a part of you that wants to believe that if they could just understand how much it hurt, they'd change. That maybe if you explained it the right way, they'd finally see your worth, apologize, and everything would somehow feel complete. But it won't. Because the kind of person who disrespects you, knowing what they're doing, isn't confused. They're comfortable. And seeking closure from someone like that is like asking a thief to return what they stole, then expect them to guard your house tomorrow. It doesn't work like that. The more you seek recognition from the person who disrespected you, the more power you hand back to them, bit by bit, apology by apology, explanation by explanation. You start building your self-worth on a foundation they already cracked. You make their understanding the gatekeeper to your peace. And worst of all, you wait. You put your healing, your strength, your sense of self on pause until they get it, and they rarely do. The Stoics would call this the ultimate error in judgment, outsourcing your stability to someone else's opinion. Epictetus warned that we must never place what's up to us in the hands of what is not up to us. Their respect, their remorse, their clarity, that's not up to you. But your detachment, your boundaries, your peace, that's entirely yours to command. This is where real strength begins. Not in changing someone else's mind, but in refusing to let their failure define your identity. You don't need an apology to move forward. You don't need their acknowledgement to reclaim your dignity. You don't need to be understood to be valid. And the truth is, some people will never understand. Some people are so deep in their own ego, so invested in control or insecurity, that they will never meet you with the respect you deserve. That has nothing to do with your value and everything to do with their limitations. You might think that expressing your hurt will change something, that maybe if you open up and share what they did to you, they'll have a moment of clarity. But here's the truth that hurts. People who care don't need explanations, and people who need explanations usually don't care. You don't need to pour out your heart hoping they'll finally treat it gently. Your healing is not a performance, and your worth is not a debate. When you realize this, truly internalize it, you stop trying to teach people how to love you. You simply love yourself enough to walk away. This is the Stoic path. Not coldness, but clarity. You can still feel the sting, still acknowledge the hurt, and still refuse to beg for their validation. Because when you validate yourself, when you look in the mirror and know without question that you are enough, you become untouchable. You stop being someone waiting for closure, and you become someone who is closure. Your silence begins to say more than your explanations ever could. Your composure becomes the final word. And your peace? That becomes your revenge. And this shift isn't just for them. It reshapes everything. People feel it when you no longer seek their approval. They notice when you don't chase clarity or validation. Your energy changes. You stop orbiting around other people's recognition and start living from the center of your own. That energy commands respect. It sets the tone, and without even trying, you teach others how to treat you, because your life no longer makes space for anyone who needs to be convinced of your worth. But even after detaching from their need for validation, there's still one final storm that can undo your growth, your emotions. Because disrespect doesn't just hit your pride, it hits your nervous system. And if you're not careful, the emotional chaos that follows can cause just as much damage as the original offense. So next, we're going to talk about how to stop your emotions from taking the wheel and how real power comes from staying grounded, even when everything in you wants to erupt. Fourth, don't let your emotions take the wheel. When someone disrespects you, it doesn't always hit your mind first. It hits your body. Your chest tightens, your jaw clenches, and your heart starts to race. It's a physical response before it ever becomes a thought. And in that space, between the sting and the reaction, is where most people lose themselves. The urge to respond instantly is overwhelming. To say something sharp, to shout back, to assert yourself so they know you won't tolerate being treated that way. But the moment you give in to that emotional impulse, you hand over something far more valuable than your pride. You hand over control. That's exactly what happened to Mark, a successful man who spent years mastering his career but hadn't yet mastered himself. During a business dinner, a colleague publicly undermined him, questioning his judgment in front of the entire table. The disrespect was obvious, calculated, humiliating. And in that moment, Mark reacted. He fired back, quick, loud, and brutal. He won the moment, or so he thought. But what he didn't see was the ripple effect. He left the room angry, exhausted, and filled with regret. His emotional explosion became the real story, not the original insult. Because that's what happens when you let emotions take the wheel. The person who provoked you walks away in control, and you're left apologizing for the aftermath. Stoicism is not about pretending you don't feel. It's about understanding that feeling something and acting on it are two very different things. The Stoics believed in emotional discipline, not as repression, but as refinement. They taught that emotions are like fire. If you can contain them, they can warm a home. But if you let them spill unchecked, they can burn everything down. Anger feels like power, but it's deceptive. It convinces you that exploding is strength, when in reality, composure is far more intimidating. The one who can hold steady while being provoked isn't passive. They're powerful. They haven't ignored the insult. They've outgrown it. When you let someone's disrespect pull you out of character, you're no longer responding to what was said. You're reacting to your own wounded ego. You abandon reason. You lose sight of the bigger picture, and suddenly they're dictating your energy, your image, even your self-worth. But when you pause, when you breathe, evaluate, and act from clarity instead of chaos, you flip the script. You stay in command. You remain the author of your actions. And in a world addicted to noise and reaction, that kind of restraint speaks louder than any words could. You don't have to explode to make a statement. You don't have to shout to be heard. Real strength is quiet, it's deliberate. It's the ability to say, I see what's happening here, and I won't participate in it. This doesn't mean you let things go. You can still confront the disrespect, but you do it on your terms, when your emotions no longer own you. When you respond from a place of grounded awareness, not from emotional survival. People often confuse calm with weakness, but calm is clarity. It means your peace is not so easily stolen. It means the quality of your day isn't dictated by someone else's lack of character. It means your boundaries are firm, not because you yell them, but because you live them. Mark later reflected that his loud reaction didn't gain him respect. It only confirmed what his critic wanted to prove, that he could be rattled. What would have been far more powerful was silence, or a measured response that made it clear, without any drama, that his self-respect wasn't up for discussion. That's the Stoic way, not to suppress, but to master, not to avoid, but to choose wisely. And when you start choosing your responses instead of being dragged into theirs, you start living above the noise. You don't just protect your peace, you command it. You become someone who isn't just heard, but felt. And when that emotional clarity becomes your standard, your presence shifts. People start to notice not just what you say, but what you refuse to react to. But even when you've mastered that silence, even when you've kept your composure, there's still one more critical decision left. And that's whether or not you use your voice when it matters most. Because while silence can be power, it can also become permission. And in the next section, we'll talk about the danger of staying quiet when the situation calls for clarity, and how the Stoic path teaches you when to speak, and how to do it without ever raising your voice. 5. Don't stay silent when you need to speak. There are moments in life when silence feels like self-protection, when someone disrespects you, makes a dismissive remark in public, ignores your boundaries in private, or speaks to you in a way that cuts deeper than it should. You may convince yourself that staying quiet is the mature thing to do. You tell yourself you're keeping the peace, avoiding unnecessary drama, being the bigger person. But silence, when misused, becomes dangerous. Because silence, when delivered at the wrong time, doesn't look like strength. It looks like permission, and people take notes on what you let slide. That's what happened to Elise, a woman who prided herself on being composed, graceful, and understanding. At work, her manager began subtly excluding her from meetings, overlooking her contributions in favor of louder, less competent colleagues. The first time, she said nothing. The second time, she rationalized it. By the third time, she had trained everyone in the room to treat her absence like it was normal. Not because she wasn't capable, but because she never corrected the narrative. Her silence wasn't seen as professionalism, it was mistaken for acceptance. And by the time she decided to speak, the damage had already been done. Her voice had gone missing long before she noticed. This is what Stoicism warns us about. While the Stoics deeply valued inner calm and emotional control, they never confused peace with passivity. Marcus Aurelius didn't rule an empire by staying quiet in the face of injustice. Seneca didn't write his most piercing letters to flatter the egos of tyrants. True Stoicism teaches you that self-respect is not just internal, it must be made visible through action. That means when someone crosses a line, it's not enough to simply know your worth. You must show it. Silence in the face of disrespect sends a message, and unfortunately that message often says, "I'll tolerate this." Many people are terrified of confrontation. They think speaking up requires conflict, that using their voice means starting a fire. But that's a false choice. You don't need to raise your voice to raise the standard. You don't need to explain yourself endlessly to set a boundary. Stoicism teaches us that clarity is strength, that firmness delivered calmly is more effective than shouting, that one simple, consistent refusal to accept disrespect speaks volumes. And when you do speak, clearly, directly, without apology, you not only reclaim your power in that moment, you remind yourself that your boundaries matter. The cost of staying silent isn't immediate. That's why it's so seductive. But over time, silence chips away at your confidence. Every time you ignore that gut feeling, every time you convince yourself it wasn't worth the trouble, you begin to doubt your own instincts. You slowly disconnect from the part of you that knows you deserve better. And eventually, people believe what you've shown them. That your comfort is negotiable, that your dignity has loopholes, that they can treat you however they want as long as you stay quiet about it. But the moment you speak, everything shifts, not because they suddenly change, but because you do. You remind yourself that your voice carries weight, that you don't have to accept treatment that shrinks you. And the people who cannot handle your self-respect, they fall away, not because you pushed them out, but because they were never built to stay when you stopped shrinking. This isn't about being confrontational. It's about being courageous, about standing firmly without apology and saying, "This is where I end and you begin. This is what I accept and this is what I won't." And if that boundary makes someone uncomfortable, that discomfort is not your responsibility to fix. Your responsibility is to yourself. But even when you've spoken clearly, drawn the line, and walked away from the chaos, there's still one final decision to make. What do you carry with you after the moment ends? Because what stays in your mind has the power to shape your energy long after the disrespect is gone. And that's where the final mistake begins, holding on to what was never yours to carry. Let's talk about the danger of carrying disrespect inside you and how to finally set it down. 6. Don't carry the disrespect with you. Disrespect doesn't always leave a bruise on the surface, but it has a way of settling deep in your mind. Long after the words were said, long after the moment has passed, you might find yourself replaying it over and over. The tone, the expression, the silence that followed. You analyze it, dissect it, imagine all the better things you could have said or done. And in doing so, you unknowingly keep the wound open. You give their behavior a second life, not because it was powerful, but because you let it stay. And that's where the real damage begins. Not in the moment they disrespected you, but in the days you carry it like a shadow. Stoicism draws a clear boundary here. It reminds us that we may not control how people act, but we always control what we carry. And carrying the weight of someone else's disrespect is like walking around with a stone in your shoe. It's not fatal, but it slows you down, drains your energy, and shapes your posture over time. What was once a single moment becomes a mindset. You start to feel tense even when things are calm. You guard yourself not just from that person, but from everyone. You doubt your responses. You question your worth. And that's when their behavior, something rooted in them, starts to rewrite your relationship with yourself. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly. You get quieter, more cautious, less sure of what you deserve. And because you're still holding on, your present becomes contaminated by a past that should have been left behind. That's the subtle danger of internalizing disrespect. You make their mistake part of your identity. You begin to believe that maybe you provoked it, that maybe you should have handled it differently. But that belief is not clarity, it's residue, the kind that lingers when you haven't fully let go. Letting go doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. It doesn't mean excusing their behavior or acting like you weren't affected. It means choosing not to let that moment become your emotional compass. It means honoring the lesson without dragging around the pain. The Stoics would tell you that resentment is suffering twice. Once when it happened, and again every time you relive it. And why keep reopening a wound that doesn't belong to you? The solution isn't easy, but it's simple. You see the moment for what it was, a reflection of them, not you. You extract the lesson, if there is one. You adjust your boundaries if needed. And then you drop the weight. You let it go, not because they deserve peace, but because you do. Because your goals, your energy, your clarity all deserve space. And every time you replay the insult, you're filling that space with noise that should have been discarded. You cannot heal if you're still carrying what broke you. And the truth is, you don't need to wait for closure to move on. You don't need to resolve every emotional knot. You just need to decide that your peace matters more than their mistake. And when you make that choice, the fog begins to lift. The weight loosens. And your confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you didn't fold or fester, returns stronger than before. Because the final act of self-respect isn't just walking away, it's refusing to carry what's not yours. And when you release it, truly release it, you give yourself back the mental and emotional clarity that was always yours to reclaim. Now the question remains, how do you turn all of this into something deeper, more permanent? Not just a reaction, but a way of life. This is where Stoicism transforms from theory into practice. Let's now bring everything together. The silence, the strength, the boundary, the release, and uncover what it truly means to rise above disrespect without ever lowering yourself again. Disrespect will find you. It's part of life. But how you carry yourself through it, that's where your true strength lives. You don't have to raise your voice to prove your value. You don't have to chase validation or sacrifice your peace to protect your pride. Let your calm be your response. Let your boundaries speak for you, and let your self-respect make it impossible for others to forget who they're dealing with. If this message stirred something in you, if you're ready to stop shrinking, stop chasing, and start standing firm, hit that like button, subscribe for more Stoic clarity, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And drop a comment below. My peace is not negotiable. Because when you stop doing the 5 things that sabotage your power, you don't just protect yourself, you rise, quietly, strongly, unshakably.